An article titled 7 Honest Questions for Atheists has been making the rounds on the internet. As an atheist myself, I provide my answers. Also, we'll get to some listener mail in this episode of Satansplain.
Well, it's not Satan worship, it's Satanism. It's embracing the life-enriching things which have traditionally been given the devil's name. Pride, lust, earthly success, rational self-interest, atheism, humor, nonconformity, science, a passion for living, being selective about whom we love. We don't see these as shameful sins, but empowering ideals. And we also recognize the psychological power and fun of symbolism and aesthetics, so we utilize Satan as mythology's most fitting mascot for what we're about.
Satansplain, Satanic Talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M.
Welcome to Satansplain. I am your host, Magister Bill. As some of you listeners already know, I have written a number of articles over the years on Satanism. Half a dozen of them can be found on churchofsatan.com. I have plenty more, though, that were published in print or elsewhere over the years, which aren't on the site, and also a number of articles in the works. One of those articles I have been working on was about atheism and Satanism. Now, some of you may hear that and think, well, Bill, why would you need a whole essay about that? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? Satanists are atheists, even though obviously not all atheists are Satanists. Yes, that's true. Unfortunately, too many people make it out to be more complicated than that. So I have a lot to say on the topic, particularly about the side issues that come up along the way. That really deserves its own episode, but it's not going to be this episode. I am, however, going to say some things about atheism. It has also been a while since I read any listener mail and listener comments, so I'm going to be doing some of that in this episode too. But you see, recently I found an article titled 7 Honest Questions for Atheists by Dr. Michael Brown. I found it on christianpost.com, which I think is where it was published originally on July 7th, 2022. But I see many other sites have also posted copies of it. So who is this Dr. Michael Brown? I know there's a brand of Dr. Brown root beer and cream soda, but I'm guessing it's not the same guy. This Dr. Brown is a radio host and an author. He has books going back to the 1990s. From what I gather, his radio shows deal with a lot of Christian apologetics, as if you couldn't tell from the article title, 7 Honest Questions for Atheists. He says in the article that he identifies as Jewish, but his works seem much more like Christian evangelism. So I looked into this further, and it turns out he is a Messianic Jew. I first heard of that movement in the late 1990s when the organization Jews for Jesus were taking out advertisements in TV Guide and other publications. Essentially, as I understand it, Messianic Jews are people who claim to be Jewish, but then also claim that Jesus was in fact the Messiah, even though no other Jews of any denomination believe that. In other words, these guys are evangelical Christians who try to dress up their act in some Hebrew and Stars of David and other stuff, but again are essentially not taken seriously by Jews of any denomination. I think any scholarly Jew will tell you, no, Jesus wasn't the Messiah, because if he was, we would see this thing and that thing happening, and it hasn't happened, and plus the authenticity of this writing, and this writing from Christians is questionable, and there's a mistranslation here, and so on. So, yeah, Jews for Jesus, or as I've always called them, Baptists in beanies. I was really hoping that term would catch on when I coined it years ago, Baptists and beanies, but I guess it didn't. Oh well. Anyway, I'm going to read you Dr. Brown's article, 7 Honest Questions for Atheists, and give my honest answers. So here's how the article begins. If you consider yourself an atheist today, or if you considered yourself an atheist in the past, I'd love to ask you some honest questions. But I do not ask these questions to win a debate, or to be antagonistic, or to buttress my own beliefs by exposing alleged weaknesses in your position. On the contrary, I ask these questions so I can better understand your mindset as an atheist. When my wife Nancy and I met in 1974, and then he goes on to mention that he and his wife are both Jewish, but his wife used to be an atheist, and he credits her with helping him understand what he calls the atheist mindset. Whether his wife now is Jewish or atheist or Christian, who the hell knows, but then he gets into the questions. Question 1. Would you say that you are or were an atheist based primarily on intellectual study or based on experience? Or did you never believe in God at all? Put another way, was it the lack of answers to prayer, failures within organized religion, or some other anti-faith experience that first caused you to question the existence of God? Or was it something you learned at school or your studies that caused you to doubt? Or were you raised without belief in God and you've never found a good reason to question it? So I will preface my answer to question 1 by saying what I'm sure you listeners of the show already know. I am a Satanist. Satanism is a non-theistic religion. We say in the Satanic Bible that gods are the invention of man, not vice versa. The notion of deities is a byproduct of the human imagination, in other words. I don't believe in the existence of any supernatural deities, including Satan, which we take only as a metaphor. Therefore, by definition, I am an atheist, a person who does not believe in the existence of deities. Just thought I would throw that in here into the conversation, into my answers, on the chance some person who has zero clue what Satanism is listening to this show for the first time. Now, to answer the question, my reason for being an atheist is not because I was raised that way. I was raised in a Catholic household, so through indoctrination, I believed in deities at a young age. Even after I left Catholicism and Christianity altogether, it was still about a decade until I became an atheist. So my reasons for rejecting Christianity and my reasons for being an atheist are separate. Also, I didn't become an atheist overnight. I didn't become an atheist out of some traumatic experience that made me question the existence of God. I have met atheists who are like that, who say that they became an atheist when, say, their innocent and loving sibling died in a car accident. And they concluded, well, there must be no God because no loving God could let something like that happen. Which I have to say never made much sense to me as an argument against the existence of deities, because, after all, benevolence is not necessarily a requirement for being a deity. We have plenty of examples from mythology of gods people believed in who were reportedly cruel to humans. There are also some people who believe God exists, but maybe isn't omnipotent in that sense, can't prevent tragedy, or just doesn't stick his nose into human affairs at all, for better or worse. I mean, if the question is about the existence of deity, it still begs the question of what attributes you want to attribute to that deity. But anyway, no, these aren't the reasons I became an atheist. Most atheists will tell you that the reason they are atheists is because they simply see no evidence for the existence of God, so like unicorns or leprechauns, they just don't see any valid reason to assume God exists. But my own reasons for being an atheist, I would say, are even simpler than that. I just don't see a need to believe in a deity. I used to believe in deities. I used to be a Wiccan. Yes, you heard that right. Church of Satan Magister Bill M., the host of Satansplain, admin of that Church of Satan Facebook group, host of the Devil's Mischief, all that. Yes, once upon a time, I was a devout Wiccan. It was back in high school. I wore the pentagram 1 point up. I worshipped the goddess. I bought and read those Llewellyn paperback books. I had the Wicca altar. I was always hanging around Salem, Mass., where there was an enormous Wicca population. So what happened? Well, I finished Catholic high school and moved out of my Catholic parents' house, and then I rapidly lost interest in Wicca. I was no longer in an environment where I felt the need to assert myself everywhere as non-Catholic. To be on the defense, I learned that a lot of what drove my interest in religion in the first place was a love of ritual and symbolism, and I found that there were other outlets for that. There were secular outlets for that, for starters. I stopped thinking about things in terms of spirituality, and along with that went the notion of God. I just gradually came to see the whole notion of God or deities as useless. I personally just find it to be a useless and, in fact, counterproductive way of trying to make sense of the world. To try and ascribe this thing and that thing going on in life as the works of some deity who is working behind the scenes, or to use prayer or faith in a deity as a coping mechanism, I just see no need for it. So it's a model that I just don't use. Now, I do, as a Satanist, use Satan as a metaphor and a mascot. Personifications can be helpful like that, but again, I don't view it as a deity. I don't think Satan is some actual thinking, conscious entity with its own mind. I am an atheist. So let's go to the next question. Question 2, would you say that even as an atheist, you still have a sense of purpose and destiny in your life, a feeling that you were put here for a reason and that you have a mission to accomplish? Or is it primarily people of faith who feel like this, since we are simply the products of an unguided, random evolutionary process? Well, this question, like a lot of questions on this list, is built on a false dichotomy. It presumes, first of all, that people who believe in God necessarily believe in a preconceived purpose or destiny for themselves. Like I said, there are deists, there are people who believe in deism. Deism, the belief that the universe had a creator, but the creator plays no role in human affairs. So there are indeed people who believe in God, but don't necessarily believe their life has a purpose related to that God. It's not like atheists have the monopoly on philosophical nihilism. But then there are the people who have come to believe that they have a certain life calling or reason for existence, whether or not they also happen to believe in God. There are people who think, well, I'm a school teacher and I've come to believe this is my purpose in life. I just feel it in my bones. Or people who think, well, I'm a soldier and I've come to have this belief that it's my destiny to die fighting for this country. I just have this premonition. Then, of course, you have completely insane people who have convinced themselves that their fate and their reason for existence is to, like assassinate a famous world leader or something like that. By the way, those people usually don't turn out to be atheists, but I digress. To give my answer to the question, though, do I believe I have a certain destiny? I would say no. I don't believe in some sort of predetermined fate. I think actions of today obviously lead to events of tomorrow, and they're predictable to that extent, but not in some sort of cosmic way. I know that when big events happen in a person's life, whether they're considered fortunate or unfortunate, it's natural for the human mind to rationalize what's going on, to think, well, there must be a reason why this happened. But no, I don't believe that. Having said that, this doesn't mean that I go through life thinking that my life is directionless and not worth living. Just because there was no cosmic or deity-controlled reason why my species came to evolve and this other one became extinct, well, it doesn't mean that I can't find meaning in my own life. I believe that most things in life are achievable if they're realistic and you set your mind to them. I found meaning in my life through, among other things, Satanism. More importantly, what I've gotten by applying the principles of Satanism to my life. I'm proud of what I've accomplished in life. I'm proud to be making this podcast, and I certainly have reasons for making more episodes. But let's finish this question and move on to the next one. Question 3. Would you say that you are 100% sure there is no such thing as God? And by God, I mean an eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing being. Or would you say that for all practical purposes, you have concluded that this God does not exist, although it is impossible to prove such a negative with absolute certainty? Well, I'm glad he at least gives some kind of definition of God here. I think most atheists would overwhelmingly answer the latter in these two choices that he gives. They would say, well, I don't claim to have 100% certainty, but it's impossible to prove a negative, and I don't see any evidence, therefore I don't believe. Before we go any further, let me clear up a common misconception many people have. Both of these positions he describes are atheism. Again, atheism just means you don't believe in the existence of deities. Now, whether you say you are 100% sure of your convictions and you assert that deities do not exist, or whether you say you don't know for sure one way or another, but nonetheless you're still not a believer, well, in both of those two cases, the bottom line is you don't believe in the existence of God or any other deities, which means you are an atheist. There are many people who think that declaring with 100% certainty God does not exist is what defines atheism, and that people who aren't that but aren't believers either are agnostic. But that is not what agnosticism is. Agnosticism is the assertion that you can't know whether or not God exists. So agnosticism and atheism are not mutually exclusive. Agnosticism is not some sort of third alternative to theism and atheism. Theism and atheism address whether or not you believe. Agnosticism and its counterpart Gnosticism with a lowercase g address how sure you are of God existing. So one deals with belief, one deals with knowledge. You can look this up. If you don't believe in deities, you are an atheist. If you are an atheist who additionally says we can't be sure whether or not God exists, you are more specifically an agnostic atheist. On the other hand, if you assert that it's true that no deities exist, you are more specifically a Gnostic atheist. The same goes with theism. If you believe in God and claim to know God exists, you are Gnostic theist. If you believe in God but say you can't be 100% sure he exists, you are an agnostic theist. And I made a point of saying that when I use Gnostic, the opposite of agnostic here, with a lowercase g, that means something different in this context. There is a group of Christians from the 1st or 2nd century called the Gnostics with a capital G, but it has absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about here. Anyway, getting back to the question, I'm going to hold off on this specific definition he gives of God and answer whether I am an agnostic atheist or a Gnostic atheist. I think there are some further things to think about with this topic. First of all, he says it's impossible to prove a negative, but I would argue this is not necessarily the case, because I can mathematically prove, for example, with 100% logically tight proof that there is no highest prime integer. I can hold up a shot glass and prove that it does not contain a living, breathing adult elephant. Certainly not in this world of 3 spatial dimensions we deal with every day. I prove it by just taking a look in there. No, it's not there. It's possible, though, to construct statements that are not falsifiable, but that's not the same thing as a true statement. So, as an example of this, my favorite example is that I can claim that there is an invisible, intangible dragon sleeping on top of my pool cabana. Can you prove me wrong? You could say, well, I don't see it, and I can't feel it. And I would say, oh, but you see, it's an intangible dragon. So as long as I can keep making up excuses like this, the claim that I made about the dragon is unfalsifiable. Now, the most famous example of this sort of thing is probably Russell's teapot. And this is an argument that came from mathematician Bertrand Russell, who, on a side note, I thought had some rather satanic qualities. Maybe I'll talk about him in another episode. You may want to check out this lecture he published in a book called Why I Am Not a Christian. Anyway, on with Satansplain. Russell said, suppose somebody claims that a little ceramic teapot is orbiting the planet Jupiter. Can you disprove this? Well, given the early 1900s when he wrote this and the power of telescopes at the time compared to the enormous size of Jupiter and the enormously small size of the teapot in comparison and so on, no, it's virtually impossible to be able to locate such a thing. And when you check one side, it could be orbiting on the other side. So really, you don't know. And Russell then argues that this is the same thing about somebody claiming the existence of a God that is all-powerful but also intangible and so on. But here's the part that I see a lot of atheists missing. Many of them hear Russell Teapot's analogy and think that the rational conclusion should be, well, I can't disprove that the teapot is there, but you can't prove it either, so I'm just going to take the intellectually honest position and not believe nor disbelieve. If you want me to believe in the teapot, the burden of proof is therefore on you to show it to me, not me to show you it's not there. But again, I'm going to be honest and not say it doesn't exist. I'm just going to be agnostic on it. And if that's your answer, fine. But my answer to Russell's teapot would be no. No, I most certainly do not believe that there's this teapot orbiting Jupiter. And I'm going to go you one further and call bullshit on this. A teapot in outer space orbiting Jupiter? How the hell would it get out there in the first place? No, you're making this shit up, and I'm calling you a liar. And the same thing about any eternal, all-powerful, all-knowing being, as Dr. Brown says. My answer is no. There is no valid reason to believe in such an entity. You offer no means of how to distinguish a universe with such a being from a universe without one. The whole notion leads to countless contradictions. Contradictions which atheists have been pointing out for years. Can an all-powerful being create a four-sided triangle? Can he create a rock so big that he himself can't lift it? If he's all-knowing, can he know that this event will happen and use his omnipotence to stop this thing, whatever it is, from happening in the future, in which case the thing he thought he knew, he really didn't know? Also, we know from neuroscience and cognitive science that people have biological impulses which lead them to creating notions like deities. There have been entire books written about this topic. So no, not only do I not believe in such a being, but I'm calling bullshit on the ones claiming such a being exists. I say humans made it up. So that's my answer to question 3. Before we go any further, just a reminder that you are listening to Satansplain. The podcast is available on Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Audible, Google Podcasts, iTunes, and other places as well, including straight on the official website itself, satansplain.com. You can also email me. bill@satansplain.com is the email address. And now on to question 4. Question 4. Do you believe that science can provide answers for many of the remaining mysteries of the universe, including how the universe began, including where matter came from and where the Big Bang derived its energy, the origin of life, and DNA coding? Again, these questions are not intended to stump you or prove that science can't answer everything. Instead, I'm genuinely wondering if you feel comfortable saying, quote, "We may not be able to answer all these questions now, but over time we'll get the answers and we won't need a God to fill in the gaps," end quote. So my answer is yes, science in fact has already provided plausible explanations to these questions. Abiogenesis is the science that deals with the origins of life. We have direct evidence that amino acids form under natural conditions. We also have some good ideas on where the steps can go from there to RNA and finally DNA. And this is another topic for which entire books have been written. You don't need a PhD in biochemistry to understand it, but you do have to learn some things beyond layman's terms. That's what I had to do, and I'm glad I did. As for questions about how the universe began and where the Big Bang derived its energy from, one problem that creationists make when they make questions like this is that they assume time is completely linear and Newtonian. They apparently haven't read up on what Einstein published over 100 years ago, along with experiments from other physicists that led up to that and the discoveries of physics since then. I think it was Stephen Hawking who said asking what happened before the Big Bang is rather like asking what's 10 miles north of the North Pole. So the singularity is where space-time was formed. We can trace things back to what happened after the first fraction of a second after the Big Bang, which, by the way, was not an explosion in outer space, as many creationists like to strawman it as, but it was the expansion of space itself. So there are certainly questions that haven't been answered yet. To quote comedian Dara O'Brien, science knows it doesn't know everything, otherwise it would have stopped. That's why we still have scientists doing science for a living. But just because we don't know everything doesn't mean you get to fill in the gaps with whatever fairy tale appeals to you, he said. And saying, well, God created the universe. I'm sorry, but that's not an answer. That's just a baseless assertion. It doesn't answer anything. Even if we went along with it, the question would then be, okay, where does God come from? And of course, the creationists say, well, God was always here. Okay, but then why can't we just say the universe was already here? Because by crediting things to God, you're not only making a baseless assertion, but you're not answering anything. What were the mechanics? The Bible says God spoke things into existence. Okay, so how does this magic incantation thing work? Do the words end up vibrating matter and then they take on shapes that way? Can anybody else do it? No. Why not? He breathed into a clay figure and it became Adam. Okay, this implies magic breath. Is the air filled with little robots who add DNA to the clay, or how does it work? Again, saying God did it is not an explanation for any of this. Crediting God with the creation of something doesn't lead us to any more of an understanding about it. And with having said that, let's just move to the next question. Question 5. Have you had any experiences in life that caused you to question your atheism? Has something happened to you that seemed genuinely supernatural or otherworldly? Or have you been confronted with some information that shook your atheistic foundation, such as a scientific argument for intelligent design? If so, how have you dealt with such doubts to your atheism? So as already explained, atheism means no belief in deity. You can believe in something that you think is supernatural and still be an atheist, so long as that thing isn't a deity. Personally, I do not believe in anything supernatural. In fact, I think the term doesn't make much sense, because anything we can objectively observe and measure is part of the natural world, and that includes artificial things humans have created, in this context of natural versus supernatural. So even if I were to witness something that seemed to defy the laws of physics as I know them, for example, and I knew somehow it wasn't a trick and so on, well, that's still not supernature. That's nature because it happened. Now, Anton LaVey has talked about the supernormal, and that's something different. Most people, Satanists or not, have experienced things that might be described as supernormal, whether it's a strange experience that we just don't have a credible explanation for, maybe events lining up in such a way that you really don't feel like you can sincerely chalk it up to being the product of pure coincidence. I've had experiences like that. And I just treat them as that, personal experiences. And you see, this is a problem I see mystics making, as well as their counterparts, the militant atheists. Mystics think their subjective experiences are objective proof of something. And atheists, and I mean the hardcore atheist types, the ones, the kind of atheists who will yell at you for having a keychain with your zodiac sign on it, those types. Well, they demand objective proof for people's subjective experiences. So again, just to repeat that, I see mystics who think their subjective experiences are objective proof of something, and then I see atheists demanding objective proof for other people's subjective experiences. And as a Satanist, I have to say, neither one of those ideas makes any sense. You can have a strange subjective experience, maybe one that's even meaningful to you, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to justify it to other people. You can just enjoy it for its own sake. And for that matter, maybe you like reading stories about these things. Maybe you're into reading about accounts and anecdotes of people who allegedly saw the Yeti in the Himalayas or encountered sea monsters or UFOs. If you like that sort of stuff, well, I don't see how you can't be an atheist who enjoys that sort of thing, at least reading about it. If other people have a problem with that, well, that's their problem. Now, as for intelligent design, have I encountered anything like that which challenged my atheism? Well, the answer is yes. Years ago, I was at the apartment of somebody I was dating at the time, and their roommate had a couple of huge stacks of Jack Chick tracts. Now, Jack Chick tracts are these little black and white comic books from a Christian evangelist named Jack Chick, and they're passed out by proselytizers looking to convert people. And I read this one comic that was about evolution. I think it was called Big Daddy. And it made all of these arguments against the evidence for evolution. Now, I didn't suddenly surrender my sanity to Jesus at that point, but it did at least make me wonder if there was any truth to it. And that actually got me into reading more on the topic. But long story short, I realized that the arguments in the Jack Chick tract were bogus. I learned precisely why they were bogus and how they didn't shoot down biological evolution. And then I went online where I would run into creationists. I'd see further arguments they presented and the counter-arguments from scientists. And the more I took the time to read up on biology and biological evolution, I realized, these creationists who propose intelligent design are clueless morons who keep making the same 20 bogus arguments about 90% of the time. And the remaining 10% of the time, well, their arguments are just new variations of those 20. So yeah, I've come across arguments for intelligent design, and it just further reinforced my atheism at the end and my already low opinion on Christianity. Next question. 6, are you completely materialistic in your mindset, meaning human beings are entirely physical, human consciousness is an illusion, and there is no spiritual realm of any kind? Or are you superstitious, reading horoscopes or engaging in New Age practices or the like? I think superstitious is the wrong word here. I think mystical or mysticism inclined might be a better choice of words. But the short answer is yes, I do hold a materialistic worldview. The longer answer is that I have a materialistic worldview, but I wouldn't call it consciousness an illusion. I think it would be more accurately described as a thing we call a large collection of neurons and other brain activity firing off at the same time. I mean, we have other concepts like that we use. The economy, for example. What is the economy? Well, it's not one sort of tangible trait you can pick up and look at. It's the result of millions of people and businesses with money using them for different transactions and making more transactions and so on, we look at all those systems happening at the same time, and we call that whole phenomenon the economy. Likewise, consciousness is, I believe, the byproduct of just a bunch of different physical brain activities. As for things like horoscopes or New Age practices, well, as a Satanist, again, I take the view that these things do not hold some kind of supernatural power, but they're not entirely useless either. Anton LaVey writes about horoscopes in his book, The Satanic Witch, pointing out that while there is no real reason to think that the positions of the stars have some direct effect on your daily life, the fact of the matter is many people do believe that. Many people do believe in astrology, and you can use this to your advantage. Also, I think lots of people are into their astrological signs because people are usually quite interested in themselves. And when you have a system that says, hey, you were born in this part of the year, so that means you have this special symbol, this special symbol's name, here are a bunch of flattering adjectives describing you, and so on. Well, I mean, most people see that as a cool novelty thing. And of course, the Satanic Bible goes into detail about ritual and organized ceremony, calling on the names of this mythological god, whatnot, in this special environment with a certain mindset and so on, stimulating your taste with an elixir, stimulating your hearing with bells and music. And we can say that you can make a psychological use out of all of that. And that's what we do. And also use that to sustain your philosophical convictions as well, without having to treat it as some kind of mystical belief like virtually all other religions do with their respective ceremonies. Finally, we get to the last question, question 7. If you were convinced that God truly existed, meaning the God of the Bible who is perfect in every way, full of justice and mercy, our Creator and our Redeemer, would that be good news or bad news? And would you be willing to follow him and honor him if he were truly God? Well, it would be bad news, not in the sense of, oh, gee, it would be bad for me personally because I believed in the wrong thing the whole time. No. Bad because it means the world is being ruled, or at least intervened, by some tyrant, a mafia boss. I have read the Bible. The God of the Bible is most certainly not perfect in every way, not full of justice and mercy, not a redeemer of anything, just as the mafia boss who decides he won't fit you with a pair of cement shoes if you pay him isn't merciful. So, if we're going to assume in this ridiculous hypothetical scenario that he exists and he's as the writers of the Bible describe him, I'd either only be following and honoring him out of fear of being punished, or more likely I'd just kick him in the nuts and say, you're an asshole. The way you drowned all but 6 people on the planet, that you set up Eve for entrapment in the Garden of Eden even though you knew what was going to happen. What kind of megalomaniac are you? Why would any sane person revere you after the shit you pulled? So those are the 7 questions. Those are my answers to them. Brown finishes the article with a paragraph of more disclaimers and asks people to email his responses to him, info@askdrbrown.org. But I thought his questions made for a good excuse to talk about this topic on Satansplain. So, having said all that, let us take a break. I will come back with some answers to listener mail. Stay tuned.
You are listening to Satansplain, real satanic talk with Church of Satan Magister Bill M. For questions, comments, and correspondence, send an email to bill@satansplain.com.
You ever notice how people who believe in creationism look really unevolved? Eyes real close together, big furry hands and feet. I'll believe God created me in one day. Yeah, it looks like he rushed it.
If you like religion-bashing laughter and other comedy that's not made for the masses, then check out The Devil's Mischief. Visit devilsmischief.com for more details. The Devil's Mischief, carnal comedy clips and Netherworld novelty numbers available on Radio Free Satan.
In 1966, Anton LaVey created the Church of Satan, marking the beginning of the Age of Fire and Year 1 Anno Satanas. In 1969, he published The Satanic Bible, codifying Satanism as a religion, the first time it's been done in human history.
In the name of Satan, ruler of the earth, king of hell, come forth from the pit, bestow the blessings of hell upon us. For we are your children, and we invoke thee this night.
In 2001, I was appointed High Priest of the Church of Satan. In 2007, I published the Satanic Scriptures, further defining and expanding on Satanic philosophy and greater magic ritual.
Hail, Satan full of might! Our allegiance is with thee. Cursed are they. The God adorers. And cursed are the worshippers of the Nazarene eunuch.
For the past 50 years, the Church of Satan has stood as the sole organization to define and defend Satanism as a religion. And though pretenders to the infernal throne have come and gone, we have stood the test of time and will into the future. Visit churchofsatan.com for more information and read the Satanic Bible and the Satanic Scriptures. Knowledge is the solution for ignorance. Hail, Satan!
Hail, Satan! Hail, Satan!
Magister Bill M. here with Satansplain. Recently, I was a guest on a podcast. I was a guest also on Dr. Karlin Borisenko's show, but then I also recorded a show called Judy Talks. I was a guest on that show. Judy had reached out to the Church of Satan to ask some specific questions, some topical stuff, not just the same old Satanism 101 things. So I said, okay, I can take this one. We had some technical difficulties at the beginning. There were problems on my end, but I jumped onto a different computer. We managed to finish things from there. So hopefully that came out well and should be out soon. I'll post a link to the usual channels once I have it. And I think it was in the previous episode of Satansplain where I gave an anecdote about a Satanist I know. Actually, it may have been one before that. But in any case, I thought, satanic anecdote. Maybe I should just call it a satanicdote. And a number of you commented on Twitter or emailed me and said, yes, you should have more of these satanicdotes. We took a poll on Twitter as to which way we should spell the word. Should we take the word satanic and then finish off with dotes to get SATANIC Or should we take the word anecdotes and put SAT in front to get satanecdotes with an EC instead of an IC? I think the second spelling beat it out by just a few votes. But Mark from New Zealand wrote in and said he was listening to the show while driving, and when he heard the term satanicdotes, he says, quote, I immediately let out a noisy holler of support, much to the surprise of my fellow traffic jammers. Now, Mark also suggested that maybe this could be something listeners send in, and I kind of like this idea. So if you are a Satanist with your own satanicdotes, maybe you can send them to me. I don't need your entire life story or your story about how you got into Satanism or how you feel about Satanism. I don't want to hear that you spray painted a pentagram onto your neighbor's door, because there's nothing satanic about vandalism. But if you have an amusing anecdote, a little story about yourself, maybe you were wearing your sigil necklace out in public and got a funny reaction, or the Jehovah's Witnesses came to your door and something else happened, or you applied something from the satanic witch and some funny things happened. Well, you as a Satanist, you may have your anecdote, so email it to me. Maybe if I get enough, I'll read some as a recurring segment. We'll see. Email them to me at bill@satansplain.com. Don't post them as comments on social media. Just email them to me. bill@satansplain.com. About a month ago, Sarah wrote an email asking about social media, if it's maybe been a double-edged sword for Satanism. Also, a great question on Satanism and objective reality. And I have to apologize because I kept saying, oh yeah, Sarah, I'll go answer this in the next episode. But then I'd make an episode and not do that. So I wrote Sarah back a short response on these topics, but they are things I think warrant their own episode to address, so hopefully soon. I started structuring an episode to address them, but then this news came out about this thing and this other thing in the U.S. Supreme Court, and I ended up making what became the previous 2 episodes of Satansplain. But again, I didn't forget you, Sarah. I will do this eventually. It's already in the works. In fact, shortly before Sarah emailed me, another listener named Fotis, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, also asked a related question about Satanism and objective reality. So again, all the more reason to address that in an upcoming episode. Getting back to the listener mail here, other listener mail, Tony says, just finished Satansplain episode number 10, and I think Satanic Dotes sounds great. Been listening since episode number 1. Hope you continue. And by the way, my daughter thinks your satirical voice sounds like Homer Simpson. Thanks, Tony, and I don't know what to make of that. I wasn't trying to sound like Homer when I was doing the voice of... But I'll have to go back and listen to myself and see if I can hear that too. Maybe it is kind of Homer Simpson sounding. Anyway, interesting observation from your daughter. A couple episodes back, I said there was some debate about the pronunciation of Baphomet versus Baphomet, and Laurent wrote to me and said it's Baphomet, it's French, and that's how I pronounced it. And like I said, some say that's correct, some say that's incorrect. Truth be told, I only got into saying Baphomet in the first place because that's the way it's pronounced in my all-time favorite movie, which is Clive Barker's Nightbreed. Came out in 1990, and it was based on his novel Cabal. There was a great re-release of that book, by the way, with a foreword by Magus Peter H. Gilmore. I was happy to see it wasn't just me that found some satanic aspects in that story, especially Satanic Statement number 7 shows up there a lot. Arsenius wrote a few questions to me, which I answered in private, but also provided an ice cream recipe. I think in one of the previous episodes I joked that you could send me, email me an ice cream recipe if you like, because one of my hobbies I do on the side is making ice cream. I have an ice cream maker and I make ice cream at home. And he gave me a recipe, so what the hell, I might as well share it. He says, get some berries like raspberries or black currants and put them in a wet fridge. The fridge has to be one which has accumulated snowy ice over time so that the berries have a snow coating. Then after a year, take the berries, put them into a metal blender, usually those universal ones which can make soup and whatnot. Add eggs, sugar, and blend. That's all. Best ice cream I've ever eaten. Well, I may have to try that, even if it takes me a year. But then again, I do have some frozen berries in my freezer from a year ago, which may have freezer burn, but hey, maybe I'll use that. Maybe it will work. We'll see. Thank you, Arsenius. To others who have emailed me, I'm pretty sure I've responded to each and every one of you, unless maybe you were a spammer or a troll or a holy roller or something. Though I guess trolls would include the holy rollers. Anyway, likewise to those who've commented words of praise on social media, I've tried to stop by and, give a like to your comments. So while I'm not going to include each and every response here on the show, I'm not going to read everybody's thing here on Satansplain. I just want to acknowledge once again, thank you for listening and taking the time to write in. I do my best to read and respond to everybody. I do, though, want to read one last email. Dave writes in and says, I just wanted to say I've just found Satansplain and love it. I've been a long-time Satanist on my own. I've read the Satanic Bible many times and the Satanic Witch some time ago. I was going to register as a Church of Satan member regardless, but your show has solidified that desire. Keep up the great work. Hail Satan. And I'm finishing with that because that is what I like to hear the most. That you're a Satanist who has liked what you heard and has led you to your decision to affiliating with the Church of Satan or doing something else within, if you're already a member of the Church of Satan, the organization responsible for that Satanic Bible, that book that revealed to so many of us what we are. We're Satanists. And I hope Dave makes the most out of his membership in whatever way he sees fit. I know I have certainly got a lot out of my membership in these past 20 plus years I've been a member. Learn more at churchofsatan.com. And I will end the show there. Thank you for listening. This has been Satansplain. Hail Satan. You have been listening to Satansplain. If you have enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe where available. For more information on the show, visit Satansplain.com. And to learn more about Satanism itself, visit churchofsatan.com. This episode, copyright 2022, Magister Bill M.